So Clyde Peters, now he's working in Peru. He's doing his mission pilot work. And he has somebody there who's working with him, who's working possibly even harder than he is. You might think, oh, let's see, who could it be? Could it be Alfredo Kalbermatter, the man who had helped him when they were cleaning the plane, and then he's the nurse and his wife came there? No, actually, I'm talking about Eleanor, Clyde's wife. Eleanor and the 3 kids came and joined Clyde there at Yurinacocha, at the mission base, at the mission outpost, once Clyde had the house all done and put together. They arrived, and he had it pretty nicely set up. Despite being out on the edge of the jungle, they had a pretty nice living situation. They had screens on the windows, super important. When you're surrounded by mosquitoes, they can carry hepatitis and other things. They had a generator so they could have electricity. They had a refrigerator. They even had a small stove. So it wasn't too primitive. But Eleanor had a lot to do besides just be a mom or a homemaker. And I'm going to tell you, anybody who's a mom and a homemaker, she's doing a lot more than those titles might capture. Because Eleanor, for example, also had to be the radio operator. Whenever Clyde was off traveling in his plane to other places, he'd be in constant contact from the radio from the plane to the big radio that they had in the house. And he would be checking in with her. Is any signals come in for me? Anybody need help anywhere? Here's where I'm going. Here's what we need to plan for. Hey, I'm coming back with somebody injured. So Eleanor had to run the operator. She was a cook whenever people would come. Groups would come from the cities nearby, from the bigger cities, to help build the mission base. She would cook for everybody. She would keep account of all the books. She would make sure that the airstrip was kept clear so that when he came back for landing, it was always clear and ready to be landed on. Clyde liked to say, hey, you know what? Eleanor is the real missionary here. Because I just get to do the thing I like. I get to go out and fly a plane around, and she's doing all the hard stuff. Well, Clyde also had a little bit of a problem. If you think about the stories we've talked about from Clyde so far, we could kind of gather that he was a pretty go-getter guy. When he put his mind on something, he was stubborn. He'd go and he'd do it, right? But part of that was also that when Clyde made up his mind about something, it was hard for him to change it. He would get his mind made up. He would be a little judgmental sometimes. He'd decide, this is how this person is, this is what this is about, and then he wouldn't change his mind, and it could sometimes get in the way of being a good missionary. For example, one time, while Clyde was out working in the villages, he came back to find out that Eleanor had lent some money to a native woman. A native woman had been passing through Yurinacocha. She was going to be going by canoe down to Pucallpa to go to the hospital, and she wanted some money to be able to pay for the hospital bill. And so Eleanor had given her 250 soles. Soles is the unit of currency in Peru at that time. And that was quite a bit of money. Like, it was quite a bit of their paycheck that they got paid every month. So when Clyde found out that she'd given away a lot of money to this native woman that she'd never met before, she didn't even know the lady's name, and the lady was now going to be just going off to Pucallpa, well, Clyde was pretty upset. Why would you give her that money? You know how these natives are. They're not reliable. You can't trust that they're going to be able to pay you that money back. You're never going to see that money again. And what about our family? Huh? We have needs. How come you're letting them just take the money? Not a very Christian, kind, and trusting attitude, but that was the thing, is that even though Clyde had a lot of faith in some ways, he could let his own attitude get in the way of trusting God. But do you know what happened? 1 month later, the woman came back by canoe. I forgot to tell you what they call the canoes there in that part of the Amazon jungle. What they call the canoes there are pecky pecks. And you might wonder, where in the world would how could you connect pecky peck with canoe? The reason is that they would use these big dug out canoes, like big logs that had been hollowed out, but they wouldn't paddle them because they had a long ways to go. They would use these small outboard motors at this point in history. And the outboard motor sounds like this when it's going. And so they called the canoes pecky pecks. So 1 month after this woman had borrowed the money, here came a pecky peck, and it was the woman. She had been to the hospital, she had gotten healed, and then she had gone about doing what she could do to raise the money, and she came back and paid it back in full 1 month later. And not just that, but for an entire year after that, every Friday morning, they would hear pecky coming up the river to Yurinacocha, and it would be the woman coming with a basket of fruits that she had grown to say thank you for a whole year. And Clyde said, she taught me a lesson. She taught me a lesson. I need to not be judging people so much. And she taught me a really important lesson about how to show gratitude when someone does something nice for you. If somebody let me 250 soles, I would have been like, well, I paid you 250 soles back. I'm done. Thank you. but she spent a whole year showing her gratitude. Man, Clyde thought, I need to learn something from that. But there was still more that Clyde needed to learn. Clyde still was so judgmental, and he'd get so stubborn. And one of the ways that he'd become judgmental is he had decided that there was a particular group of Indians that were not worth his time. They were called the Chayawitas Indians. They were a subgroup, a tribe within the general Campas population. Remember that Campas was the old name for them. Now they're called the Ashaninka. But he had decided those Chayawitas, it's not worth the time. All they do is drink. All they do is drink, wander around the jungle. They never do anything to raise money, to take care of their children. They're poor all the time. I'm not going to waste my time with them. But there was another man who had decided he was going to waste his time with the Chayawitas. He didn't see it as a waste of time at all. His name was Artur Augusto Doñez, and he volunteered. He gave up a good-paying job as a carpenter and said, I'm going as a missionary to the Chayawitas. So he worked in the region where Clyde Peters worked. Clyde Peters saw him every once in a while, and he would check in and ask him, so how's it going with those Chayawitas? And Augusto would say, it's going well. It's going well. We have some people that are starting to wear clothing. Oh, great. They're wearing clothing, Clyde said. How's it going with those Chayawitas? He asked another time. It's going pretty good. It's going pretty good. We have 2 families now that are letting their children sleep under a roof, so they don't have to sleep out at night anymore. Oh, wow, that's great. They're letting their children sleep indoors. Wow, that's so great. Clyde really just didn't think that they were very good people. He had this idea in his head, and he didn't want to change his mind. Even when Augusto ended up now telling him that 300 Chayawitas had become baptized over the 3 years that Augusto had been working there, Clyde still was like, yeah, I don't know. You keep working with them. It's not for me. But one day, Augusto came to Clyde and said, hey, I want your help. There's one family of Chayawitas that lives in the town of Balsa Puerto, and they want to learn to keep the Sabbath. I got a message saying they want to learn to keep Sabbath. So this Sabbath, let's go and visit them, and we'll show them how to keep the Sabbath. Balsa Puerto, said Clyde, no. I have flown over Balsa Puerto. They had an airstrip there that they cleared years ago. They have not been keeping it clear. I don't think we can go. And Augusto said, we should try. So Sabbath came, they got into the plane, and they flew out to Balsa Puerto. It was only a 15-minute flight. It wasn't a big deal. But when they got over the area, they could see, yep, the airstrip didn't have any trees. It didn't seem to have any stumps, but it was just all a solid green. And what they couldn't tell is, well, that looks like it's just grass, but how tall is the grass? Because remember, this is not a huge jumbo jet that Clyde is flying, right? It's a small plane. It can seat maybe 3 to 4 people if you pack them in really tightly. And when you're landing in a small plane, you want things to be level, and you don't want anything getting caught in your propellers or twisting your wings around. I said, I don't know. Maybe we should turn around and go back. And Augusto said, no, it's okay. God will watch over us. We're coming to spread the news about the Sabbath to this family inside the middle of this village of people who don't believe in God. Let's do it. Let's go for it. And Clyde, against his better judgment, came down. As he got closer, it was grass. And it wasn't grass that was just this high. It wasn't grass that was this high. It was grass that was 6 feet high. And he landed in it. And it was just like flying up over as the propeller was going through like a motor, like a lawnmower turned on its side. Just Clyde said, we're never going to get out of here. How are we ever supposed to take off in this mess? And they finally came to a stop. And when they came to a stop, all the villagers came rushing out to greet them. Unfortunately, that particular Saturday, that particular Sabbath, had been a feast day for the villagers. And every single adult in that village that came out to greet them was drunk. And they were so excited to see a plane in such a long time. They all gathered around, and the way they showed their excitement was they took their sticks, and they took their spears, and they started poking holes in the fabric that made the tail and fuselage of the plane. Oh, look at this plane! And Clyde was so angry. Get away from the plane! He started yelling in Spanish and a little bit of Indian language that he could speak as well. And they looked at him and said, you can't boss us around, gringo. Gringo is a term which usually refers to a white person in a Hispanic place. They'll call you gringo, which can sometimes be used a little endearingly, but it's usually kind of an insult. And then they even said, go away. We don't want you here. We know you're a pistaco. Did they call him a fish taco? No. They call him a pistaco. A pistaco was their term for evil white spirit. You're just here to take some of our children away. You're just here to cause trouble, to bring a curse on us. Well, finally, the people got bored poking holes in the plane, and they went back to the village where they could keep on drinking. What do they like to drink? They like to drink something called mazato. Mazato. By the way, you guys are getting all these terms for free today. You know what I mean by that? Usually Mr. Wheeler is sitting somewhere over here frantically scribbling these down so that he can quiz you on them in the Bible, in the spin the wheel thing. But he's not here. So you don't have to worry about memorizing what these things mean. Isn't that great? They would drink mazzato made from rotten fruit that they would ferment in a barrel for a couple of years, and then they would drink it. And they'd get really drunk. They went back to drink mazzato, and now Clyde and Augusto wandered through the city, the village, and they had to be careful because it was dirt streets, and they let the animals roam everywhere, so there was animal poop all over the streets, and nobody ever cleaned it up. Like, for years. Have you ever been in a horse stall for just like after 2 days of a horse pooping? Now imagine that there's been horses and cows and chickens and goats pooping anywhere they want for years and nobody cleans it up. So they're carefully and constantly trying to make their way through the city. And they're asking, has anybody seen the family? There's a family that had sent a message to Augusto. And somebody said, oh yeah, they're at the bar. At the bar, says Clyde, why would they be at the bar? I thought you said they want to learn to keep Sabbath. Augusto said, well, let's talk. Let's go find them. They made their way to that bar. No, they're not here. They're at that bar over there. So they went across, they crossed the city back and forth. Couldn't find them, but they weren't in any of the bars. What Clyde noticed is there was only bars in this place. There was no restaurants. There was no hotels. It was just a bunch of people living in squalor. Squalor is a term that means like really bad conditions. Clyde was getting hungry and he was getting impatient. He was thinking about how are we going to take off the plane? How are we going to get the plane to take off? And by the way, it's already kind of like mid-afternoon. So we only have about another 6 hours or so of daylight to work with here. Come on, what's going on? Finally, they find somebody who says, oh, no, those people that you're asking for, they no longer live in the village here. They said they didn't want to live this close to the village. I don't know why. Yeah, I wonder why, thought Clyde. So they moved. They just went a little ways up the river. You just got to go a little ways up the river. And Clyde had been there long enough to know that when people said a little ways anywhere, it usually wasn't a little ways. They made it sound a little ways, but it could be any distance. Clyde said, come on, Augusto, let's just go back. Why are we wasting our time here? Let's just go back. We're not going to get anything done here. We already have enough trouble, and I'm hungry. Haven't had a single thing to eat. This is ridiculous. Augusto said to Clyde, Clyde, God will provide. Just have faith. Clyde couldn't do it. He was so feeling just judgmental about everything around him, so upset. They made their way, following the directions, and sure enough, that little way down the river was a whole hour. They finally got there, and they walked into a hut, and there was a family of about 8 people, and they were sitting on the ground in the hut in a circle, and they looked at him and said, oh, you came. We've been sitting here since we woke up this morning because we knew today is Sabbath, but we didn't know what to do on Sabbath. And Clyde felt a little guilty about how grumpy he'd been. He thought, wow, these people really have faith. They don't really know what they're supposed to do, and they're just waiting for instructions. I'm kind of glad we came, I guess, but his stomach was growling. He was so hungry still. Augusto said, I would be glad to teach you about the Sabbath. And Augusto proceeded to preach to them about the Sabbath for 4 hours. And the people in that room all were just listening, so happy to be taught about the Sabbath for 4 hours, except for Clyde, who now could only think about his hungry stomach and the fact that the sun was going down and how was the plane going to take off and where were they going to sleep anyways. And he was so grumpy. And by the time they left, it was after dark, and they're making their way back down the river path, trying to find their way with their little weak flashlights that they had. And Clyde is complaining. Now what's going to happen? How are we going to eat? What are we going to do? Augusto said, Clyde, God will provide. Don't worry. They got into the town. They couldn't even see to walk anymore. So now they're just walking. Doesn't matter. Whatever's going to get on my feet is going to get on my feet, thought Clyde. I'll just have to wash this off later. And then all of a sudden, they heard a voice coming from a little alley between 2 buildings. There was a little boy. And he said, señores, señores. It's the Spanish word for sirs, misters. Señores, come with me. Clyde said, let's not go with him. He's going to rob us. Augusto said, God will provide. Let's see. They followed him, and he took them down the alley around a corner, opened a door, and they stepped into the house of the only sober adult in the village, the only person who wasn't drinking. She was a teacher who had been sent there by the government to teach the children. And she said, sirs, I heard you were here, and I thought you might be hungry. I have a meal ready for you, and not just any meal. She had a table with a tablecloth. She had china plates. She had metal silverware. And she had cooked every single possible delicacy she could get her hands on. It was a feast. I mean, Clyde had been thinking maybe they'd be lucky if they got a hold of one unboiled potato that he could just chew on a bit. And here was a feast. God had provided a feast. Clyde felt a little bit more reproved again. Oh my goodness, maybe my faith isn't that good. Augusta just looked at him and grinned. But then, after the food was done, then Clyde started thinking, now where are we going to sleep? And he started worrying again. And his worry got in the way of his faith. And he said, I don't even know where we're going to sleep. What are we going to do? And then there was a pounding on the door. And outside they could hear a voice, open up in there. I know those guys are in there. Open up. And Clyde said, we better not open that door. There's some drunk guy out there. And the woman said, no, it's okay. It's the police chief. He's just drunk. They opened the door and the police chief said, hey, you guys are missionaries? You need to come back and help my wife. She stepped on a bone about a week ago, and her foot is, woo! She's got redness up her leg, and it's not getting better. You need to come help her. It was already midnight. Clyde thought, why are we going to do that? We just need to find a place to sleep. We got to get out of here. And I don't have any medication here with me anyways. What are we going to do? Augusto said, absolutely, sir. We will help you. And Augusto cheerfully walked out the door following the drunk police chief. They got to his house. The leg was as bad as he had described. It was badly infected. Clyde said, what are we going to do, Augusto? We don't have any medication. We have nothing. He said, yeah, but we have the natural remedies that we know about, that we've learned about from Ellen White and that we've been taught through our Seventh-day Adventist movement. There's natural things we can do. Let's soak the foot in hot water, and then we'll soak it in cold water. And then we'll massage downward to see if we can push pus out. And sure enough, after a few soakings, pus started draining out of the hole in the bottom of her foot. And the woman said, oh, the pain's going away. I think I'll finally be able to sleep. I haven't slept for 4 days. And Augusto said, we're going to need to come back and do more treatments. We're going to do treatments every 2 hours. Clyde said, every 2 hours? It's 1 o'clock in the morning. He said, yeah, but we'll just take care of this. And the police chief said, you need a place to sleep? He was starting to sober up a little bit by this point. You need a place to sleep? I can get you a place to sleep. Over at the jail. And Clyde thought, in the jail? Oh, great. You know, they have the best beds in the jail. This is going to be wonderful. They went down there, and you know what happened? The police chief said, you're going to sleep in the police beds. And he went and kicked out the 2 police officers who were manning the jail, put clean sheets on the beds, and that's where they slept. They had beds with clean sheets that night. Clyde again thought, boy, I really shouldn't have been so grumpy. Boy, maybe my faith could be better. 2 hours later, they were up and gave a treatment and went back to bed. 2 hours later, treatment, back to bed. 2 hours later, it was 7 o'clock in the morning. They gave one last treatment, and the teacher had another feast ready for them to eat. And the woman was feeling so much better. And the police chief came up to them and hugged them and said, thank you so much for coming to our village. You saved my wife's life. I have sent 150 men out to the airstrip, and they're cutting all the grass off of it right now. And they went out there, and sure enough, the men were there, and they had cleared all the grass, and they were caressing the plane, apologizing to the plane for having stabbed it with their spears and sticks. And then as they got in the plane ready to go, the men said, all the villagers who were gathered around said, we want you to come back again. We want you to build a church here. When they took off, Clyde was pretty quiet. Augusto was pretty quiet. Clyde finally turned to Augusto and said, listen, I need that kind of faith. Because I can fly people around, but what good is it going to do if I'm flying people around and I'm grumpy and I'm not following what Jesus says and I'm not treating people with kindness? You just came here and you just trusted God the whole time, and in less than 24 hours, this whole village wants a church? That was an important lesson for Clyde. Parents, it's 10 minutes after I'm supposed to stop, but I have one last tiny little short little story, and I hope you will forbear with me. Because Clyde still had other lessons to learn, and one last lesson that he still had to learn was how not to brag. Because one time he was flying in and out all the time from this one little village called Puerto Llerena, and he saw that they had a crocodile, a 20-foot long crocodile that liked to sun itself on the sandbank very near to the airstrip. And Clyde said, hey, you guys, you villagers, you should get rid of that. You should get rid of that crocodile. It's going to hurt you. No, it doesn't bother us, senor. It's fine. There's no problem. He said, no, you should get rid of that. I could get rid of it for you. Oh, sure, you could, Capitan. Yeah, you could get rid of it. Capitan. He was an airplane pilot, so the term they had for airplane pilots was Capitan, like captain. Sure, you could, Capitan. Oh, yeah, sure, you could. His pride got a little bit riled up there. He said, yeah, I can. I can do it right now, as a matter of fact. You follow me, I'll show you how to get rid of a 20-foot crocodile. I'll kill it myself. And he pulled out from behind the seat in his plane his .357 Magnum gun. He said, I'm going to take this. I'll show you how it goes. You guys just have spears and sticks and axes to go after crocodiles. I'll show you how a real man does it. Come with me. Okay, senor. Well, he's out there on that sandbar over there. We have to get there through the water. He said, it's shallow water. We'll go out there. And he started wading out there, and it became deeper and deeper and deeper, and it got up to his armpits, and then it turned to mud. And he trudged through the mud for 1,000 feet, and all the men came behind him because they wanted to see what was going on. They just followed behind him, swimming and wading through the mud, and all kind of chuckling to themselves. And then when they got to the sandbar was pretty flat. Sandbars don't usually have a lot of elevation to them or any bushes or anything to hide on. So he told the men, now what we have to do, he was making this up all along, now what we have to do is we have to lay down on our bellies and we have to crawl through the sand so we get close enough to the crocodile so I can shoot it. The man said, okay, Capitan, you lead the way. So he got on his belly and he crawled through the sand. And the sandbar had these little bumps and ridges. And so he'd crawl and then he'd look up. Okay, there it was. Maybe it was about 200 feet away. He'd crawl a little more, look up. Oh, it was about 150 feet away. Now you guys stay low, okay? You got to stay behind me because if that crocodile charges, I'm the only one with any kind of decent weapon around here. I got this pistol. You guys with your sticks and your axes and your spears, you're not going to get anything done. You got to trust on me, okay? And then he kept crawling, and then he had to kind of go around this way and find a different way to get there. And then at one point, he poked his head up over the sand to look, and there was a crocodile looking at him right in the eyes. And we'll find out tomorrow what happens.